Yeah, I want to hide the wrinkles anyway.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. This is your friend Charlie Hunter in Bellows Falls, Vermont, with the wood stove going and the cats sleeping. They may wake up and we may have cat issues, but right now they're sleeping. We got Betty Sue down in Austin, Texas, pulling the strings behind the scenes. And we have an incredibly special guest today. I am so excited. We have William Wray. I have been such a fan of William Wray's. He exists in quote unquote our world of representationalism, but he also has roots in the California West Coast art world, animation. He worked for everybody. And he has one of the most fascinating Facebook pages ever because he's constantly exposing his over 10,000 followers to artists from around the world that he loves. He's an extraordinary artist. I can't wait to talk to him. Welcome, William Wray.
Charlie, we meet at last.
At
Actually, we've
last,
met before. In fact, you've gotten me employment. I appreciate that.
right here, right
Yeah,
here.
there it is. It's the man.
We've never. I don't think we've never met in person. So this is still we haven't met in person. But
I
having
just sort of wanted to give a heads up to everybody. They're building a house next door, so if they start pouring concrete, we're fucked. But let's
okay,
keep our fingers crossed.
good to know. Good to know. I want to. To me, one of the most interesting things is your journey and your approach to how you present in the world through your art, because you're very open. You've got this new show called Family Fire that's at Baldwin Avenue Gallery in Sierra Madre, California.
Thank you for the
And
plug.
but family is seems to be one of the real issues that you have worked through, and dealt with. Because you said your father was an angry, unfulfilled man who loved art, but it's not what he did. And in your work, there's a kind of continual element of disturbing imagery and disturbing approach to solutions, shall we say. Tell us how did you get to doing art? How did art become the way you express yourself in the world?
Um, it seemed to be, and I'm just going to assume with most artists this is the case. It seemed to be part of just breathing.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't remember when I started to do art. All I've got to go by, because I just feel like I was born with a paintbrush in my hand. But the earliest stuff I have that actually looks pretty good with paint is at 4 or 5 years old. So it was always an impulse. Both parents did art. It wasn't that my father didn't do art. He did it, but he did it for himself and worked for the government um, to pay the bills. I think he had a fear of really going out there and um, trying to sell himself as an artist. I don't think that's a rejection he could have taken.
Mhm.
But he was actually extremely good. And I recently showed some of his figure drawings that are just out of this world.
Yeah.
Yet he obsessively would do copies of everything, I guess, to continue his furthering his education always. But
I mean,
never went after being an art teacher. I don't understand that part of my that his thing. But anyway, I'm going on and on about that a little too much.
well, I think it's interesting because I mean, your path is unique, at least in the people who we had on the reasonably fine art talks. I'll just do a real thumbnail, and you let me know if I get this wrong. But as a you started to go to college, you dropped out of college, you were doing animation for Disney and Hanna-Barbera. Then in 85 or so, you moved to New York, you studied at the Art Students League. You're doing cartooning for Marvel and DC. And then you return to New York in the 90s, work on Ren and Stimpy and Mad Magazine. You have your own strip in Mad Magazine for over 100 episodes. And at some point, you kind of move more from the commercial into the or more from the from the commercial into the world of your own painting. Is that fair?
Yes, when I went to New York, I went there to learn how to draw and paint, but and I was well placed to be in the art world. I actually found a little, an artist who was willing to rent me part of a loft space very near the corner of Prince and in Soho near Prince and West Broadway, which is the epicenter of the fine art world in New York. And the guy I rented from was an artist himself who also built harpsichords from the ground up. But he did them in his own way, in his own fashion. He didn't follow the tradition of how you build harpsichords. He was a real iconoclast to himself, so to speak. And he he encouraged me and also completely discouraged me because I wanted to learn how to draw classically. And I had found this at every turn, which was why I dropped out of college. Everyone says art's dead, drawing's dead. Take a TV, put it in a sandbox, do do that stuff. And I went around all the galleries, and everything was like that. It was a strobe light with a broken beer bottles and a bundle of sticks and loud music playing, and it was like, this is art. Or it would be these tourist galleries where everyone in the art world looked down on them, and that would seem to be the only thing going on. But I'm too easily discouraged. I went for the who's offering me the carrot. So I just did commercial art
Uh-huh.
and didn't try to find myself, because the few little forays I did into painting, I'd show to this guy and he would just go, no, no, nobody's going to want that in fine art. No, he was right, of course. But he also wasn't really, he used to show with all the really important New York artists and dropped out of it because of the politics. But where he was wrong is there was a few artists like Skip Lepke in New York who were right there, who were doing traditional art and were making inroads, and were kind of the guys that sort of, I shouldn't say guys, the people who were still holding on to tradition and saying there is a market for this tradition. And if I had found out about him and a few other people that were there and gone after some of the older artists who I discovered later who were right there, I may have jumped into the art game earlier. I do go on and on. I'm sorry about that. But to compress things really quickly, I did commercial art, animation, all the stuff you talked about for years. And then I hit my 40s and went, if I don't do this now, I'm never going to do it. In fact, it's probably too late. It's certainly too late for me to be an important artist on the world scene. But I had first started to hear about this plein air business, when I was about 44, 45 or something. So what are we talking about? Early 2005 or something.
Okay.
And I took classes with Ray Roberts. If you don't know his work, whoever doesn't know his work should look him up. He's one of the best California artists, certainly arguably the best guy at painting surf and those kind of scenes of anybody. And I just started taking those classes and started painting. And I knew how to paint, but I had to sort of find my way into that world. And I joined, I was painting at the Laguna plein air shows and going up to San Luis Obispo shows, things like that. And I got around the country a little bit, but while I recommend plein air painting to everyone, after about 3 years, it started to screw with my eyes, and I got a cataract. So I stopped doing plein air and went into the studio.
All right. Well, that is an excellent lead-in to let's put the slideshow up, Betty Sue.
Okay.
And why don't you walk us through? And if you keep going on and on like that, William, I'll just urge us on to the next slide. All right. So
I'm going to try not to. I'd like to do some back and forth with you.
all right. Now, so back and forth happens. It just happens organically. Tell us about this one, and what era was this?
This would have been around 2012 or something.
Okay.
And this what is what I considered my first. I could have given you some fumbling paintings that were on the way, but this was the first one that was larger where I said, I got it now. I know how to do this stuff um, for this world that I'm trying to do. And
Would you say that that is the when we talk about finding when a writer talks about finding their voice, are you saying that around 2012 you found your voice as a painter? Because I see a very definite through line between something like this and what you are doing now.
I think I found the voice. I think I was chipping away at the voice right from the get go because I always kind of
Sure.
said I don't want to do the pretty scenes. I want to do the urban stuff. So everybody does urban now, but there wasn't that many around doing it at the time. So I was kind of early in on that game. But what I meant on this particular case was that I'd gotten the skill level, the ability to compose, the really to pick an interesting subject, all of it
Hmm.
sort of came together on this one, I thought, and I was feeling fairly good about that.
Yeah, well, I think it's remarkable because there's nothing that isn't literally believable or literally almost mundane. Uh, I guess the Zeppelin is the least mundane item in there, but you do see them. You do see them, but altogether, it's a terrific composition, and the way that the Zeppelin is down at the far end of the viewscape and hovering there, it's kind of it's disturbing. You're registering on the disturbing meter there. Um, Yeah, yes, great sense of light in this one. The way the light is glinting off the top of the dirigible.
Well, I always try to put tension into the art, and you'll see there's that slight tension of of the cars way off in the distance, almost feeling like they're tilting, like they could slide off the picture plane.
Right.
I was starting to actually become aware that I was deliberately doing that kind of thing, and I also was taking that. I was identifying myself around that time as a California impressionist, and was really into broken color.
Okay.
That's gone out the window now, pretty much. But at the time, as I said, that was all those different things I was trying to do at once. And this was a painting I liked so much I wasn't going to sell it. And then a collector came over to my studio. One of the first times I'd had a collector with some money come over, and he was going to buy. He just said, "I'm just going to buy one of your paintings." I'm like, "Okay, great." And he saw this on the wall and said, "Oh, this is the one I want." I said, "No, sorry, it's not for sale," because it was like my little achievement, right? And he just kept offering me money until I had to sell it to him.
Good job. That's the way to do it.
And,
Next
and,
slide.
and recently, I bought it back from him because he didn't want it anymore,
Nice.
and
That's a
and
win-win.
and
Yeah.
sold it to the Hilbert Museum. So it's actually in a museum now.
That's a win-win-win.
Yeah, I lucked out on that one.
Tell us about this one.
This is my Charlie Hunter period. No, this is when I was trying to simplify my palette more. I was going through a Wyeth inspiration period, um, which I think all artists probably do, most of us at some point. I used to be only a fan of NC Wyeth, and then I thought his son was, when I was young and stupid, I thought his son was kind of pretentious, and he sort of overpainted, too realistic. I liked the ballsy pirate painter that his dad did, the illustration. That's what I wanted to do, blah blah blah. But I finally actually saw an Andrew Wyeth show, and then this was just I just destroyed all my old thoughts about him and just said this guy's the shit, and beyond. In particular, I concentrated on studying his looser work, where he was getting almost abstract.
Right, like the watercolors.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, I see this one really reminds me of the one of the few paintings that I have up in my studio as constant reminders of what I want to achieve. This reminds me of that, and the palette, of course, but the the abstraction of a lot of the mark making. Because I mean, I'll still agree with your early stupid opinion that sometimes Wyeth overpaints. Because to me, some of those egg temperas where every blade of grass, it's it's just not my taste.
Sure.
But you know, I mean, not saying it's not valid. I just don't have enough patience to paint every damn blade of grass. But now this one is called Detroit Winter. Were you in Detroit at some point?
Yes, briefly, and took a lot of pictures. But then I also had a friend who was there and a struggling young artist, and I would just send him money and say, "Go out and take a bunch of pictures." And I would have to throw out a lot of them because he wasn't a master of composition. But every now and then he'd get one, and I can't, to be honest, I can't remember if this is one I took or he took.
Well, that's good. That's good. I mean, if he had enough of if there was enough communality of vision that you don't think, oh yeah, this was one of his because blah blah. Um, but again, you're not slavishly copying a photograph here. I mean, there are a lot of decisions being made. So you are making it your own. You know. And what size is this? Is it like a 12 by 16 or so?
No, it's bigger. It's about 24 by 32.
Okay.
There's a lot of scraping and squeegeeing going on in this one too.
Yeah,
It,
it looks like some blade work. Is that?
yeah, I use the those squeegees for silk screening to scrape things back.
Oh, okay. Next slide, please, Betty Sue. Now here we're going into. I mean, this is not your Wyeth phase. This is your Hockney phase. Talk to us about this.
Well, it's funny because that's what everybody says when you paint a
That's,
swimming when you
yes,
paint a swimming pool. You're just, oh, Hockney's coming up. um, People will roll their eyes when I say this, and I'm sure he's a very nice guy. I really think Hockney's an overrated artist. I think that his work in the pantheon of the time he worked in stands out simply because there was about 3 or 4 painters who could paint and draw who were being noticed at that point. Everybody else was conceptual or abstract or pop or whatever, you know. And I think his paintings sometimes have kind of a cool feeling and an irony, and it can be kind of funny. But he started out actually as a very good artist, and then he kind of threw it away deliberately because he knew he had to get into that game. His work had to look like he wasn't that good at drawing, but his very early work is really excellent. But anyway, I'm getting way off into the mud, into the weeds. This is a little bit more like pushing that whole, still pushing that broken color
right.
type of thing. And this was my real focus at the time, which was downtown Hollywood. Um,
And,
I,
and
I grew up there in a lot of ways as a young artist. I had a studio on Hollywood Boulevard in the 70s. Uh, I knew it and kind of was drawn to it pretty honestly.
when you're working on something like this, are you? One of the things I love, and I see a commonality between like the work of Patrick Lee, which is you're willing to throw away the literal color temperatures to a greater degree than a lot of the artists working today. In your shadow area, it's getting so hot on that right hand side of the gazebo underneath the motel sign. You know, you're going from the dark alizarin crimson over into these brighter reds. Was that How did you give yourself permission to walk through that door? I think that's a thing a lot of very accomplished realist painters have a hard time doing, is giving themselves permission to stop being so literal and going more for this is what it feels like.
Well, I happen to think that Roosevelt, that kind of I want to be a camera to nature or whatever is very limiting. Um, but also in this case, people say you shouldn't paint from photography, but there's probably a very good chance that in that photograph, because it was a very warm ground and it was a warm day, there was probably some light from the warm light bouncing into the shadows like that. So I
Mm-hmm.
just when I teach my classes, I show there's a lot of different advantages to using photography simply because of the distortion and the crushing it does of the imagery. Because a lot of times when you're out doing plein air, you do this constantly and really well. You're editing like fuck, you're simplifying your what's the silhouette shape, what's the design here that I want, and I'm sticking to that, and you've eliminated color, and not always, but a lot of times you eliminate the color and stick with your brown tones and your lights,
Right,
and that makes it all about the shapes. And
right.
so I try to do both, have the
Mm-hmm.
shapes and have the colors and the complements really, really butting up against each other and relating to each other. The most exciting thing about that color, warmer color in the shadow, is right where the corner of that little top of that, what do you want to call it? I want to say the word gazebo, but that's not the word. But there's
Let's
that
go with
or,
gazebo.
orange, orangish spot next to the blue, the orangey spot next to the blue, just below the sign.
Yep,
It's almost a bright orange dot there.
yep.
I like little spots like that on the painting where we highlight complementary colors.
Right, because you do the same thing with the blue to the left of the gazebo in the far background of the motel.
Yeah.
You're doing the spots. And yeah, I mean, you're a master of that. Let's go. Next slide, Betty Sue. Oh, this one. Is this the one is this in Atlanta?
No, it's LA.
It's LA, but is it owned by a club in Atlanta or there's one of
No,
yours?
no,
Oh,
that's another painting.
okay. And take it away, William. Tell us about Mellow Yellow.
Well, this is just downtown LA. Um, this is just me going in the studio, not trying to do anything particularly special. Although I was the composition was, I my camera. I don't have to sweat it too much when I'm actually going to work. It's that thought's already done. I've taken some time to take the picture the right way, and although I might have tilted it a little bit more for that tension thing I'm talking about, um, yeah, it's just how many different ways can you frame this yellow building that's in the back as being the center of attention? And I wanted to try. I don't do this much, but I wanted to try really playing with reflections on the metal of the building, on the shininess of the buildings.
Mhm.
And it's hard to say like what was the big master plan beyond that. And
That's
and it when I was done, I was just like, oh, that came out okay. Yeah.
yeah. I think it's wonderful because it you look at urban painters like Tibor Nagy and stuff,
Oh,
and
he's great.
the way that you are it's both very very realistic in again what it feels like. You're a master of the feeling of being in a place, but then the shapes are so exciting because you let go of you're right at the edge of letting go of the literal truth, and it's like the Stephen Colbert thing of truthiness. Um, you have the truthiness of the feeling of the street, the scale of the street, the marks of the street are correct, but you're not literally depicting every automobile, every crosswalk, everything going on there. And the same thing with the buildings on the left and right that lead us down to the yellow building. They're there, but they're not there. I mean, it's masterful.
One of the most freeing things that ever happened to me is when I stopped painting every window.
Mhm.
That was so hard to let go of. And I know it's hard for all artists, to let go of that super detail and just here and there, maybe doing an impression of a window just with a few lines or whatever. The other thing I want to mention that I don't think I really noticed until right now as we're looking at this thing. Ray Roberts taught me about color, about what colors go back and what colors come forward. And he would always say that yellow was the most dominant color and will come forward on you. And so you need to be careful how you use it because you can make things come forward that you don't want them to, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm realizing now, as I said unconsciously, that building in the back is trying to come forward because it's yellow.
Right.
And but it can't because it's surrounded by all these dark shapes. But there's a tug of war between two levels on that. And
Wow,
that
that's
gives that gives the painting a tension. And then also the two windows are subliminally, I mean, that's two yellow, those orangey squares on the top, they subliminally look like a face. So you could say that this is a big monster trying to lurch its way forward.
oh well, that's your LA pop thing going on there. That's a LA pop thing.
I
And,
guess,
let's talk about that letting go of doing every window because
Yeah.
it's fascinating to me how often when I'm teaching a class, I do a workshop of doing taking photographs, doing drawings from the photographs, and then doing paintings from the drawing, rather than people trying to do direct painting from photographs. And it's surprising to me the number of people who show up with photos of very, very repetitive uh, grid like architectural shapes. I think the eye is really attracted to that, but doing it right is so difficult that what you do of letting go of so much of it, and you'll have these sharp, uh, I get those sharp lines through squeegee. I don't know the means by which you get them,
Sure,
but
that too.
but you only have a few of them, and you are willing to not slavishly copy the actual grid. You'll have things that'll be slightly wonky perspective wise, and I
Hmm.
think that adds to the tension as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
gives you that human quality. A human did this.
exactly. Rather than a machine. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking that maybe you could write a song about letting go of the windows for artists.
I'll hire Betty Sue to do that. Next slide, please, Betty Sue. Okay, you're letting go of a lot of stuff here, and you're playing up those colors again. Talk to us.
This would sort of be my Frank Frazetta influence.
Now,
Uh,
ladies and gentlemen, just a second out there. I don't know. I don't know whether everyone knows Frank Frazetta. He was like the great. He was like the great Tarzan and buxom jungle ladies artist of all time.
Conan.
Oh,
Conan. Conan. He was the guy who defined Conan.
see, what I remember him from is early one
Yeah.
morning in the jungle from Mad Magazine, where all the apes are waking up and Tarzan wakes up and
He
Tarzan
was a heck of a cartoonist too. That's how he started.
is great. Anyway, talk to us.
Well, I literally played the Robin Trower record as I was painting this because I was trying to get myself in a frame of mind to do a kind of a fantasy art scene that was very abstract, but yet somehow had some reality to it. So I just said, the whole time I was just thinking of a bridge, you know, and and then there's that one little thing up there that could maybe be a little part of a bridge or a tower, or maybe just at first glance it could be a figure walking with a staff of some kind. But I just wanted it to this was kind of it was called Bridge of Size, but it could have easily been called Bridge to Abstraction
Mhm.
because that's where I was going. I was trying to get stuff more abstract, yet somehow keep one foot in the real world.
Uh, and other people may not know, Robin Trower was an extraordinary guitarist, and Bridge of Sighs was one of his most prominent albums, if I recollect correctly.
Yeah, and the song is very ethereal,
Okay.
and which this painting I hope is ethereal.
Yeah, and it's big. It's a 3252.
Yeah.
And was it underpainted with those the yellows and oranges, and then the colors were additive on top?
I probably probably did an orange underpainting for it. I certainly did at some stage do tricks to scrape back
Mm-hmm.
and work over an orange ground. So it may have been entirely in oranges. I honestly can't completely remember.
Okay. Yeah, scraping back is really a wonderful technique to open things up when we get too clotted in our own brains, don't you think?
Yes, and it also gives you a feeling of depth that you can't get any other way.
Expound.
Uh, there's something about the scraping off of one level or another, like if we're looking at the top left-hand corner and see those shapes there, um, painting in the orange around those shapes would not feel as translucent and going through them as scraping back
Hmm.
uh, gives you that translucence. It's just, it's really hard to define. I know you're trying to get me to define it, but you've done it before. I'm sure you've taken a squeegee and just gone right across a whole area, and that abstraction and that squishing of everything together and that scraping away, well, it looks just like a street, and I didn't even have to paint it.
Right.
You know,
Absolutely.
that's what I'm talking about.
It's a important tool in the artist's toolbox that I
And you
think a
could have
lot.
spent 2 hours painting that street, literally, and it wouldn't look as natural and fresh as that scrape away. So it's kind of like letting nature work for you in a way.
That's a good point. Yes, exactly. It's keeping the human out of the our desire to always tighten things up. It keeps it out of the
It's
equation.
related to taking colors and pouring them on a canvas and moving your canvas back and forth and letting them bleed into each other. It's very much like a watercolor idea in a way, although when you scrape on watercolor, you can't do it, you ruin it, but oils you can. And in particular, you can do it on canvas, but I recommend wood because you can beat the shit out of it.
Right, right. Well, it's interesting that right going, if we're reading from top to bottom on the left hand side, from the kind of scumbled misty area, there's then this almost Maxfield Parrish orange and blue uh, that ends up looking very deep. Again, it's detail that isn't actually detail, and then it goes into the purple blue passage below. Was that orangey passage? Is that squeegee work on top of blue? Is how do you remember how you got that contrast level?
It's hard to remember, but I think it's a combo because the work is too delicate, particularly over on the left when you see those little orange parts kind of, is that smoke or is that a little trail going off in the distance? It works as both.
Right.
It was probably a combo.
It's a great work there. Next slide, please, Betty Sue. Here we go. Here we go. This, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell a little anecdote for a second, if I could.
Okay. A refreshing beverage.
Okay. My friend Richard Shindell is a wonderful songwriter, and he's constantly utterly sick of what he's doing. And he had a record coming out, and he'd asked the designer at the record company to get him some designs, and they got him all these folk singer portrait pictures with the types, very nice type saying Richard Shindell, Careless. And he's like, I can't stand these. Charlie, do you have any ideas? And I'd just seen that William had done this series of the street performers in California, these just beat up human beings. And I just thought that this would be perfect for Richard. And so I grabbed that off the internet and did a rough comp with some type on it and sent it off to him. And he's like, oh my God, I love this. It So you can find a record out there in the world, ladies and gentlemen, Richard Schindele's Careless, that uses this image on the front cover. The one concern was that the record company was going to get sued by DC and Marvel. So they did put on the cover, they put, this album is a product of Amalgamated Balladry LLC and is not affiliated with Marvel, DC Comics, Sony, or any other corporation. The people in it visually depicted are actual street performers, not fictional characters. And we didn't get sued. But anyway, talk about this series, Richard. Richard William.
Yeah. I was, again, back in the days where I was trying to find myself, and this would be around, in the case of this stuff, would be around 2015, 14 or so. I wanted to do some figurative, and I was from comic books, so I had worked at Marvel and DC. But the last thing I wanted to do was comic book. I wanted to do something with comic book characters, but I didn't want to have them look like they were from comic books. And I didn't, I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do exactly. Yet I was going to comic book conventions and seeing these people walking around in these costumes dressed up as Batman or whoever, and kind of finding it, most of us found it pretty humorous because a lot of guys would be overweight and not look remotely like they could be a superhero and that kind of thing. So we would cruelly joke around about them. But one day I somehow was at Hollywood Boulevard and saw them walking around there, basically shaking down the tourists, like, take a picture with me. Then they go, oh, that'll be $5 or that'll be $2 or whatever. And they're like, oh, I didn't know. Oh yeah, it's standard around here. Just kind of being a little intimidating. And I started taking pictures of those guys, and I just thought, I wonder if I can make it look like these guys down here and not like the superheroes themselves, get it across that they're street performers, as you described. And I did a whole bunch of these. I was really into it for some time.
It's an amazing series because I mean it reads it narratively it's fascinating. I mean you've got that painting Roommates where you've got Superman getting his mail out of the box and Batman staring down the stairs, staring daggers at him because don't know what they did wrong. But anyway, but the design on this, I could look at this for ages with the again, I'm guessing a really hard-bladed squeegee giving you the lines behind the characters. And all that brushwork, just beautiful painterly brushwork of the figures, like looking at Batman's near leg, the way you that's a brush stroke, and the yellow behind it makes it just read utterly convincingly. But then the design itself, it so reminds me of N.C. Wyeth's one of the blind guy tapping down the road in Treasure Island. All those angles pointing in to the two figures. I mean, the design on this is extraordinary.
Well, Wyeth taught me a lot of that stuff. I looked at the painting you're describing a million times. Seeing it in person was just mind blowing. But yeah, I understand composition, and I focus on it basically for my workshops, because I think a lot of people try to do workshops and just turn the person into a painter in 3 days, and you just can't freaking do it.
No.
It's what I try to do is get them to see composition and learn how to see what makes a painting, and I leave and just block it in, and that's basically what I leave it at. Let's get a good little block in design. But anyway, as you said, here there's a million things that point to the characters and anchor them to the ground.
Yeah.
That door above Spider-Man almost is crushing him. The lines in the ground are all pointing. The yellow shape line pointing at Batman, that almost just looks like, I didn't even thought of this before, but it almost looks like he peed his pants. It's like when I get lucky a lot of times. There's many of these elements were right there in the photograph. But yes, I'm sure I adjusted a couple of them here and there to make them even more eye-catching, leading your eye.
Yeah, I mean, this painting works so beautifully on both the deliciousness of the textures, the intelligence of the design, and the narrative, the mysterious narrative, and it's funny. I mean, seeing Spider-Man smoking, it's just that is inherently funny because you don't think of it, Batman peeing and Spider-Man's smoking is not in the pantheon of superhero behavior, you know. Um,
Well, I think I was a better painter then, really. I don't think I paint that good anymore for when it comes to detail. Like I got the arm pad effect on Spider-Man, so it'll look like it's a pad, not like a muscle. I made the ears kind of look clunky and corny on Batman,
mhm,
because I wanted it to look like a crappy costume. I wanted people to see that a lot of these Batman guys have sticks in their cape so they can raise it up as a display thing, like an insect or a peacock.
uh,
And that's why it has that hard line there. So it's all just observation from nature. So even though this is so urban and everything, it's absolutely the kind of observations that you should make and put into your work when you're doing plein air. So,
fantastic.
so I always tell everybody, you don't have to paint plein air all your life, but put about 3 years into it. It really makes you as an artist.
You learn a lot. I mean, it's like figure drawing. You know, that doesn't have to be the be all and end all, but it's a wonderful thing to know how to do. Next
Yeah.
slide, please, Betty Sue. Okay, so this is you're continuing with the comic character, but this is a slightly different series, um, or the fantasy character. And when does this date from?
That's probably a year or two later from the Batman one you were looking at. And
So
I'm still painting pretty tight then. This is me trying as hard as I possibly can try to do my best painting. Um, I try to do stuff that is serious but humorous at the same time, but not too humorous.
mhm,
And believe it or not, the sign there is real. And this is why this was meant to be. I didn't know it was there. I was driving along with my model looking for places to stop and have her pose. And there it was, like within the first 5 minutes of driving the car. And it's just like, oh my God, I'm onto something here because nature, I don't know, the painting gods are working with me because that's just hilarious.
mhm.
So I
So
don't know if it's hilarious, but it was to me.
this well, it's darkly funny,
Yeah.
and dark humor is some of the best humor there is.
Yeah.
Um, so was this a scene that you, in one way or another, transposed into paint? I mean, was there a shopping cart? Was there a cement wall that she's sitting against next to the sign? Is this fairly literal as to what was in the scene, or is this a pastiche?
Oh,
Of,
it's literal, except that I may have adjusted the card a little bit, but it was
really?
there. It was there to use, yeah,
Huh,
because there's a
huh,
lot of homeless around that area and a nearby shopping center. So,
right. And the model, is she someone who is down there in the tourist area dressed as a princess normally? And you,
well, here's the deal, and I think the model was a little bit self-aggrandizing crazy, but I don't remember if it was Nigeria or where she was from, but she claimed to be from royalty there that had to flee during a purge. And she was driving a delivery, uh, not a delivery truck, but a express delivery for packages in her own car, uh, and she was kind of a drug addict, a very beautiful woman. Um, And I wanted a black model to do the whitest of white princesses. That was the thing I just wanted to do. Um, and she was perfect for it. She was a model for a photographer friend of mine. And so I just hired her for the day. We rented a princess costume from The Wizard of Oz and just took her all around Van Nuys. That's why she's Princess Van Nuys.
Fantastic. Next slide, please. Now this you're moving into much. This reminds me of some Eric Aho's swimming pool paintings, his ice paintings. But talk to us about this one.
This is a few years later when I'm just starting to really get into big scale abstraction. I had been doing small scale for a while and found it fairly easy to do, finally. But doing it on a bigger scale was difficult. And this was like the first one that really satisfied me, where I was really thought, okay, you got it right. You're on to something. This is a building out, abandoned building out in Joshua Tree. And I just took all the detail out and just left in a few shapes that were there that were made an interesting abstraction, but it still has some sense of reality to it, but less reality than I'd ever put in before. And that's always been my goal, is to kind of like, okay, here's reality. Oops, let's get my camera right here. Here's reality. Here's a abstraction. Get closer, 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 closer. Touch, but don't push like that. But just almost one. You could say one balances the other, or you could say, yeah, just 5 or 6 more brushstrokes would make it too real. If that makes any sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's what my analogy on that is always to point to Jimi Hendrix' Star Spangled Banner, which is much of it is noise. It itself is a political statement because it was a comment on bombing Vietnam, but it's noise, and then all of a sudden the melody will emerge beautifully for a moment, like the thin red line you've got there, and then it goes back to the noise and sound. And this, I mean, I don't know what is going on. I wouldn't have known it was Joshua Tree. I wouldn't have known it was a abstraction of a literal scene, but it is still a very convincing. It's a convincing world I can step into. I don't know what it is. It's a fabulist world, but it's so compelling, and it is so weird. It's so well composed. I mean, again, all the angles, all the things pointing to, there are all these triangles which are hugely important for moving the eye around, but then you've got a couple of these almost Philip Guston rectangular shapes up in the top left hand. So you've got the shape, but then you've also got the color temperatures and the color values with the sky and the top of the structure. The blue gray and the orange. Amazing. I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, it's basically I just pulled a simple shape out, and I'm not even 100% sure I was conscious of it, but it's basically a big 7 if you stare at it for a minute. And so all the other shapes create that shape without being super obvious about it.
What's the big 7? I don't see the big 7.
Okay. Your eye from the left corner,
yeah,
going up to almost the top part of the black on the right corner, and then zigging all the way back to the black on the left. That's kind of like what I'm talking about. It's
that's okay.
Like this. Oh, I can't do this backwards.
No, it's really hard.
It flips the scene, so my brain won't let me do what I'm supposed to do. But
yeah. Okay, but you're talking about the triangle in the lower right as the descender of the 7.
The whole light warm gray part. Merge that into the black. Merge that into the orange.
Got it.
And then just separate the blue, the little patch of white. and the
Yeah.
black on the bottom corner, that's kind of a 7. I know I'm pushing it, but
I
but it, basically it's an eye lead going through up to the
very,
right and then jagging over to the left.
very much,
Yeah.
very much, and that's so important. Many of our viewers are painters, and what what you're talking about how the eye travels through the picture plane is so important, and it's interesting to hear that when you teach, that is really one of the capital things that you are trying to leave students with.
Yeah, totally flat abstraction doesn't interest me. It's too graphic for me. I like the idea of, I said before, abstraction with depth to it.
Mhm. Next slide, please, Betty Sue. And is this Ludlow, California, Route 66?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. This was specifically painted for a Sue Greenwood show. I She's a gallery in Laguna Beach, for people who don't know, who I I, I don't want to call it a tourist gallery because that's considered a term of derision in the business, or something. But there is an element of, there's a lot of artists who are painting kind of beach scenes and stuff like that, abstracted quite a bit. Um, Usually, almost all the artists there have really a pretty good sense of design, a pretty good sense of color, a pretty good sense of drawing, and a pretty good sense of abstraction. I'm one of the more real guy, although she has a realist or two as well, but the subjects are generally fairly safe, and I've sort of been categorized as the abstract landscape guy. So I don't do total abstraction for her. I kind of dial it back and mix it put a little bit more realism than abstraction in it. And this is a prime example of doing that.
Okay. Now I do not think of Ludlow, California, as being a place where emerald green, uh, where there's a lot of emerald green. Uh, what went into those color decisions?
Um, that's a tough thing to define, going back to the moment. Again, it's just like complementary colors,
Mhm.
and how can I do them so it's not just a replication of a photograph and the local colors there. And I believe that this sky was done with a new trick at the time that I don't do a lot of, because it doesn't rain here much. But I think I threw a green color down and let that dry. And then I put a darker green color over the top, and I left it out in the rain.
Huh.
And then came back and did a little scraping into it as well. Again, it's that thing, that sort of spattering look in the sky there. That's raindrops.
Yeah.
And it's, and I've also done that with a hose, but there's something about doing it with the rain that makes it, I hesitate the word, it sounds pretentious as all hell to say magical, but when you can use Mother Nature to kind of do part of your job for you, there's no way you can paint that,
Mhm.
you know?
Well, it works. It works beautifully well, though. It does seem like a little Irish for Ludlow, California. Uh, I also love the brushiness of the shadow forms in the foreground, and just that you let those just the texture of the brush mark.
I use big cheap brushes, usually plastic ones that you buy at Ralph's, and I'll take in this case I took a straight edge and just took the brush and touched the canvas, the wood with it, and then went, and that's the effect you get.
Yeah,
I'm sure you've
cool.
done stuff like that.
I do a lot. I did well. What I like to say is by any means necessary.
Yeah.
So next slide, please, Betty Sue.
Now you're touching on, despite the date on there, this is my most recent work. Everything, this was done about 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, probably.
It's part of the. It's part of the.
My current show, yeah.
Yeah.
And this was an example of the photo had everything in it that to me is wrong in design. And that
Mhm.
is the figures were centered, they were overlapped, and they were lining up into a tangent effect because literally the bed in the foreground, which is breaking that tangent a little bit, wasn't in the photo. It was absolutely lined up with the mother there. And so there was almost like a straight ruled line from her shoulder down to the corner of the bed. And I varied it a little bit, but I like the challenge of how can I figure out how to make a centered composition interesting? Because I almost always just move something to the left or something to the right, never put it in the center. And I also wanted to paint all kinds of parts of this room. I wanted to paint that lamp on the right, and I wanted to paint the TV on the left. It was even busier room than this. I did simplify it somewhat, took a few chairs out and the like. But I'm striving really hard to have the kind of bravery that we see a lot of figure painters doing now, like the Alex Kanevskys of the world. Like he kind of one of the main starters of it, and that is to distort and simplify the figure. Wipe out a face or whatever it is that you might do. And it's tremendously, tremendously hard for me to do it. I can do it in the background elements easier, but there's something about wanting to do narrative work where you're destroying that seems to weaken the narrative.
Mhm.
But I'm convinced that if I can figure it out, it will strengthen the narrative. But
Right.
it's a tough process.
Well, that's why it's a challenge. I mean, you're one of the things I think is so exciting about your work is that you're always moving. You're always pushing what you're doing. And I'm not blowing smoke up your ass on that. I'm very interested in the white shape at the far side of the bed. What is that something you put in there? Because I think it's very, very necessary because it's a counterpoint against the television or the shape that is the television. Um, what what was the thought with that white shape?
Well, I
On the,
actually put the wrong title on this because I'd modified the title. And somehow when I was putting these together for you, I forgot the title of the painting is White Pumps.
oh,
And
okay,
the shoes that are there on the bed that just look like a little bit of white
yep,
something
those are
are
white
are
pumps.
her pumps. And they might have been a little bit closer to the figure. I'm not sure, but I moved them a little maybe. But that was one of the elements, believe it or not, that made me want to paint the whole painting, as small as they are.
Hmm.
And it's a big paint. It's a fairly big painting. Seeing it on this scale kind of kills the painting, to be honest with you. You have to sort of see it
Hmm.
bigger, and then you go, "Oh, white pumps. That makes sense."
Right.
Now it's just a couple of little lumps there.
Right, but I think design-wise, it is very, very important because it would just be kind of a drought between points of visual interest between the backs of the children and the side of the woman and the lamp over on the far right.
We haven't talked about threes, have we?
No,
Um, Three is something I discuss with my students. I love doing three things that relate to each other. So the light on the figures, the light on the TV set, and the light of the pumps is a three.
okay.
And there's several three big shapes stacked next to each other in the background. Three,
Mhm.
three, three here, three, three, three there. You know, uh, when you keep the three in mind, you're staying away from even things. So you want odd numbers, not even numbers.
Interesting. You think that and
Asymmetry is everything to me, not
right.
symmetry.
But it's also interesting to me on the right hand wall of the motel. There's the kind of golden brown color, and the edge of that on the right hand side is sharp, but then it you lose some of the sharpness of the edge into the pure gold color, which I assume is the illumination of the lamp.
Uh
Uh,
huh.
And to me, the softness of that, the harshness yet softness of that transition is a wonderful counterpoint against the harshness of your transitions on the left-hand side of the painting. The kind of aqua color, the magenta color, the purple color, the doorway color. Those are hard, hard transitions. That one on the right with its implied softness is, I think it keeps things off kilter again. It keeps things from being repetitive and overly similar.
It balances, and then you also can use the hard lines to kind of redirect your eye,
Right,
so there's going to probably be more hard lines around the figures
right.
for that reason, and the same thing, the accents of color to draw you there.
Great, great. Next slide, please, Betty Sue. What do we got? We got almost pure abstraction here. We've got a PGO or something right in the center, but what's going on here?
Well, this is an example of practicality of your collector base in a show.
Okay.
How do you paint for, like, if you know that there's going to be somebody there who likes this subject of painting, and how do you do it without just catering into the level of, how should I put this, of a commission, shall we say? Like, um, the guy that runs the gallery is associated on a producer level with the Fast and Furious franchise. And so there was a very good chance, and one of them did come, that the actors would be coming to this show. And I said, okay, I'm going to do a painting from Fast and Furious, but I'm going to make it an abstraction. But you can't tell it's a car unless I tighten up. I did, the grill and the tire are defined, and everything else is an abstraction. So it's amazing how little realism you can put into an abstract painting and have it look more real than it is. But then it can kind of bounce back and forth. And there's a lot of palette knife in this. And I don't know, I was also making an attempt to, I worked from a photograph from the movie, but I was making a strong attempt to make it mine and take it, not just do some literal copy of something.
Right. But that's very true what you're saying about the counterintuitive nature of, if you have one defined element in a large area of undefined elements, the brain is going to work so hard to make sense out of that it's going to read the defined element as being almost photographic to a degree that it very often is not at all. I
Yep.
mean, that's a really abstracted, or it's kind of a hieroglyphic. It's a symbol of tire. It's not a literal. You didn't spend a lot of time getting each one of the spokes on that tire exactly the way it is. We know what it is because you're using kind of broad symbols. Now the grill, that's also so masterful because I'm reading that as so photographic, and when I start staring at it, it's like, that's not so damn photographic.
Well, and we're also getting a lot of reduction here.
Yeah.
And that always makes stuff look more real.
What do you mean by that?
Well, when you're standing in front of the actual original painting, it's so much bigger. You can see this brush strokes. You can see it looks looser, all of that. Then that's why you start to stand back. And as you stand back, it gets tighter.
Got it.
So we're all judging stuff on the internet all the time, and we really don't know what that painting looks like a lot of time. I mean, when it's really crappy, but
Right.
Sometimes you come in person and you go, holy shit, these paintings are better than I thought. But then a lot of times you come and you go, God, these paintings are not that good.
Right.
Because they benefited from that reduction.
Yep. Absolutely. Next slide, Betty Sue. This is terrific painting.
Thanks. So. I was happy with that one. Yeah, this is getting into the heart of the show. You saw one of the kids and the mother on the bed. But okay, I want to do a close-up now. And these are all photographs from the 60s and 70s that I found in antique stores or I bought off of eBay. I did not want to use imagery that you just see you can just search and it'll pop up for everyone. I wanted it to be imagery that I kind of owned, so to speak, because the families had been, shall we say, thrown away.
Hmm.
Um, and this was a couple that was in a bar, and so I called it Happy Hour. And she didn't look that drunk. They looked like they were just having a good time at the bar, and someone took a casual picture. And I decided this hits home for me. My dad was an alcoholic. That's a whole other story. But I thought visually, how can I make her look drunker, and also with the distortion and with spatter and other things like that that can be kind of like in cartoons. That spatter would be a shorthand to make someone look drunk.
Right.
It's a visual cue, a visual voice of this means somebody's drunk, or could mean other things too. And this was also painted over an old abstract, and parts of it were left to just come through. And like the blue on her neck, it just happened to be on the old painting, and it's sort of, you think, oh, she's got a choker on or something.
Right.
But it's just the blue of the old painting left there.
Interesting. And so the turquoise of his kerchief, was that, did you add that once you had realized that the blue of the old painting was working?
That is added because I wanted it brighter.
Sure. And I
But
mean,
the other little bits of darker blue, there's one on her, couple on her head. There's some in the background. That's from the original painting.
right,
Some
and
of the oranges from the original painting too.
that's so cool. That's so smart. Again, to letting other things do a lot of the work for you. You know, it means keeping your antenna up and your heart open to letting, to not imposing your exact preordained will upon the painting. You know, you let it evolve through the accidents that occurred in your mark making. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's kind of saying the Sargent thing of happy accidents, except that he was, I think, speaking of just his brushstrokes making a quick, decisive move, and all the aliveness of that brushstroke would turn into something more realistic than it should. Um, it's that if you can get a stroke that's hitting quick and fast and lively and full of something, that's life right there.
Mm-hmm.
So much better than copying it carefully, realistically.
Right.
Um,
Right. Well, one
but if
is
you're a super realism painter, you don't necessarily see that or care to understand it. But it's, to me, it's the essence of painting.
right.
And
Well,
when you go hyper realism with the tiniest of brushes, I think that's kind of like rendering, not really painting.
right.
It's an arrogant thing to say, but that's how I feel.
Well, it's like a description of it's a description of a scene as opposed to a participant in the scene. It's not, this is what life feels like. This is very deliberately saying this is exactly what was going on here, you know.
Yeah,
And
the figures are way more detailed in real life, and I just,
yeah,
you
let
know,
it go.
yeah.
Terrific. Next slide, please, Betty Sue. I believe it's the final slide. Yes. This is Hopperbat. Because we have Batman and we have House by the Railroad. This is true American iconography going on here, ladies and gentlemen. Um,
I was I was trying. It was a nod to Hopper, and it's also a nod to Christina's World. Um, and he was not on fire originally, and it was an entirely different color scheme. And then I remembered that for some reason, because I was doing these fire themes here and there in the show, I remembered that horrifying photograph of the monk before the Vietnam War started, setting himself on fire. And Batman never dies anyway. So even though he's on fire right here, he's having a bad day. I think I'll burn myself alive. He's not going to die. He's a franchise.
exactly. All right, and this show is up for like another month or so.
January 7th is probably when we're going to close it, but it might extend a little longer. It's kind of freewheeling there.
All right. And that's the web address, ladies and gentlemen. And Betty Sue, why don't you make our heads large again? And boy, Williams, thank you so much for taking us through this tour of your work. I just think you are the cat's ass, as they say. I think you're really astonishing painter.
I was hoping I was the cat's meow. I'm his ass.
The cat's ass. That's
All right. All right. Coming from you, I'll take that.
All right.
And being that animals like to sniff each other's ass, we need to get together.
All right. Well, I look forward to that, William. I look forward to that. And I thank you so much for joining us. And thank you all out there for watching the Reasonably Fine Art Talk. We'll be back next week, I think, with John Lasseter. So John Porter Lasseter the fourth, not John Lasseter, the Pixar guy. All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You take good care. And bye-bye. Thank you, William.
Thank you, Charlie. Appreciate it. Talk to you later.